Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight for a special live Q&A with SCA alumnus RJ Cutler, the creator and executive producer of the new Apple TV Plus original series, Dear, which is now available on Apple TV Plus. RJ is an award-winning director and producer whose feature documentaries include the Oscar-nominated The War Room, the Emmy-nominated A Perfect Candidate, the Sundance Award-winning The September Issue, the Peabody Award-winning Listen, Me Marlon, The World According to Dick Cheney and Thin. He's also been a pioneer in the area of nonfiction television, having created such landmark programs as American High, Freshman Diaries, and 30 Days. Cutler's scripted work includes conceiving and directing Nashville, directing the feature film If I Stay, and creating, writing, directing, and producing the Webby Award-winning podcast, The Oval Office Tapes. Upcoming projects include the feature documentary Belushi and the untitled Billie Eilish documentary, an all-access intimate look at the last year in the life of the 18-year-old pop sensation who recently became only the second person in history to win all 4 major Grammy Awards in a single year. So thank you very much for joining us, RJ.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about the origins of your new show, Dear, which is a 10-episode series. And it's such a beautiful idea. I'm curious to know where it came from.
It's a good question. You know, projects have the story of where these things come from is always really kind of interesting and different, so unique with each project. In this case, soon after Apple announced that Jamie Ehrlich and Zach Van Amberg were going to run the operation, the TV operation, we all kind of got together. They're old friends of mine. And Zach, in fact, and I had worked on a show back maybe 2001, 2002. And so we've known each other a really long time. And we were sitting around talking about stuff we might do together. And they had just come from some Apple gathering in which a kind of long form promotional piece had been shown, which is to say it was 1.5 minutes, maybe 2 minutes long. And it was in it, in this kind of highly cinematic way, people had written letters to Apple thanking them because the watch had saved their lives, changed their lives, affected their lives, and it didn't in any way suggest TV series. It was the per minute was probably more expensive than anyone could ever stomach for if you were to think of it as a TV series. And more than that, it was about a watch. But they were like, "You think there's a show in that?" And you don't say no when the head of any television outlet, when a buyer asks you if you think there's a television show in something, the answer is yes. And then you off you go to think about what that yes might mean. And so I did. And the kind of breakthrough moment was the thought, well, people expressing gratitude in letters for something that had altered their lives. There's something there. And if the person who had altered their lives was someone who had put something specific out into the world, we might be onto something. And the kind of prototype I had in mind, or the archetype that I went back to them and said, imagine this show, was Bruce Springsteen and The Rising. And I thought, imagine if people had written the letters that were written to Bruce in the wake of September 11th, when The Rising came out, when that album came out, and people listened. That was such a healing moment and such a healing work of art. And what other healing moments and healing works of art might there be? But I thought I just could picture someone kind of, or many people responding to Bruce in that moment. And then, and they got it. They saw it, I saw it, and they said, go, make. And so that's how the show came to be. And then it was a question of kind of, I knew we wanted a film directors. So, you know, at the top of the list was Spike Lee, and I knew we wanted, you know, somebody in the theater world. So at the top of the list was Lin Miranda, and on and on and on. And we put together a list. And of course it's those folks who really make the project have its foundation, and then it's the letter writers who give it its heart and soul. And that's really how the show came to be. And what I think nobody quite expected was how emotional it would be for the makers, for the folks who were the recipient of the gratitude, because, you know, that's the ultimate connection, really. And as you know, Lynn says, you put this work out into the world, and it ripples. And Oprah quotes Maya Angelou saying, "Your legacy or is the lives you've touched." But until you kind of are experiencing that, the effect of the ripple or the lives you've touched, your work kind of is sent out into the ether. And we get to see in this series a direct confrontation in the best way of creator and impact and change and all of those things. So that's how it all kind of happened.
Well, I can only imagine the volume of mail that, you know, people like Stevie Wonder and Oprah receive, and I'm curious to know how easy it was for them and for you to actually find the letters themselves that you were going to use.
Well, everybody's different. You know, it's true that there are volumes of letters, and some people have them better organized than others, and some people are getting letters and others are getting tweets and others are getting emails. So with everyone, it was a different process. But again, what was so striking was and it was almost a discovery in the moment, was the idea that it's not like these folks are sitting around reading their fan mail or reading the letters. And so once it became curated and we really were choosing the most powerful of those letters, the experience of them experiencing them became a really significant and emotional aspect of the show, and very moving. And then, you know, we also were bringing the letters to life and finding that form, you know, because the show really is it's certainly, there's an interview, as you know, there's an interview that forms the spine of it, but in almost every other way, it functions as a scripted narrative. Not scripted, but, you know, the devices are not the devices of traditional documentary, they're the devices of narrative storytelling.
So when you say we, in terms of curating the letters, were the guests, I mean, were the interview subjects complicit in choosing them, or did you have a batch that you could work through and then you sort of sprung it on them for that emotional impact?
A much more B than A, but really there's a process. We had a team. Our team would work with their team, the folks who knew where their letters were, and could give us access to them. We'd read through hundreds, thousands of letters. We'd also do research and look online and see communications that were going back and forth with different people. And, you know, there are some people who we're also looking to put this letters together in a way that tells stories, because the Oprah episode, for example, you're finding key moments in her life where she's transitioning and things are changing in her life, even as the work that she's putting out in the world is providing key transitional, inspirational moments for other people whose lives are changing. So you've got transformation resonance going on. It's very much a puzzle that has to be put together, and it all has to fit. So there are a lot of criteria involved in finding the right letters, but we're looking through any resource we can find them through.
And the other beautiful component is that you actually have people reading their own letters, or at least cutting to them as you're hearing the letters being read.
Yeah.
And I'm curious how difficult that process was, because there's so much personal information in these letters. Was there a sense of not wanting their sort of their privacy broadcast to the world? Were they hard to find?
Yes, and yes is the answer to your question. In different cases, different challenges, as you can imagine. It's why the work we did, the directors who worked on the individual episodes were so critical to the success of the show. I mean, really, the degree of difficulty on this one is pretty high, because as I was explaining, kind of just putting the pieces together and setting it up, everything has to fit. But then, as you rightly identify, each individual letter writer is going to come along with her or his own unique challenges, whether it's the ability to read and be in on a set, or it's their openness to sharing, their comfort level of sharing a deeply emotional moment, a revealing moment, a moment that's often filled with a reminiscence of a life challenge that could have been painful, loss frequently. And working with them sensitively becomes a critical aspect of the director's job. Listen, reading and walking and at the same time and looking up and revealing yourself through eye contact to the camera is not, it's a developed skill. And there were no performers in this. Nobody was, as you point out, nobody was performing the letters except the person who had written them. And so there are a lot of very specific challenges to the creation of this show, but and then the editing of it requires a kind of elegant transition from interview to letter to performance of letter, and then back to interview. And it's listen, I'm an enormous fan of everybody who worked on this show, and they're brilliant editors, they're brilliant directors, there's brilliant cinematography. Lyle Gamm, who was our showrunner, who ran it on a day-to-day basis, did absolutely brilliant work and in bringing all of the elements of it together. And, bless our friends over at Apple, they were super patient with the process. They gave us the resources we needed. I told the story of going back to them and saying, here's what the show's going to be. But it's got to be extremely cinematic, and it has to have the room for its full emotion. And it's not going to be cheap. It's not like this is an expensive show. And they were like, we're on board. And they were great.
How did this work in terms of a production process? Did you go to the authors of the letters first and film with them and then do the interviews to make sure that you were going to be able to have the footage to cut away to?
Well, no, the interviews by and large came first, but there are exceptions to the rule in each case. And sometimes we'd do an interview and then we'd do a pickup that put it together. But there's no single formula, except that by and large, the interviews came first.
You don't have to name names, but was there anyone that you wanted to have, and that for one reason or another, either they're not, besides not being available, anyone who didn't want to be a part of something like this?
No, the entire world wants to be in
That's
this.
amazing.
I'm actually teasing a little bit. There's always going to, booking has its unique challenges. You've got to fit right in people's schedules. Sometimes they're busy. Sometimes they're preparing for the U.S. Open. Sometimes they're doing their Broadway show, Bruce, and not available. Some, but it's amazing that we got Spike and Stevie and Oprah and Misty and, Lynn and like the folks who just were insanely busy. The interesting part of it is we really don't, we decided that we would be the easiest people they had ever worked with. So here's the offer. We'll come to anywhere in the world you want us to be. We will bring, you don't have to move. We'll come to you anywhere on earth you are. And all we want is half a day of your time. And that's pretty, there was a lot of upside to that. But I don't want to be, I like to say every single person who was in the show agreed to be in the show. But sure, there's some folks we would have loved to have who for one reason or another didn't work out, and hopefully there will be subsequent seasons, and in subsequent seasons folks will come on board. So, and also you're putting together, that's another kind of puzzle. You're putting, you can't have 10 directors or 10 prima ballerinas or 10 Broadway, maestros. You need a full mix. And so we're also putting together the puzzle of the actual 10 folks who are going to make up a season.
Because the episodes are all sort of different lengths, I wanted to ask a little bit about the editing process.
Yeah.
Because, inviting someone who's written one of these letters to shoot with you, to have this recorded and shared, that's a sort of great, sort of an intimate thing to share with someone. It would then seem really tough if that person's story has to get edited out. And I'm curious, in documentary, you have to lose stories all the time. Is this the case with a show like this, where you shot stuff and then it didn't fit? And it had
a lot less than you would, than the question suggests, or than, the documentary ratio. If you're shooting a verite film, you mentioned the Billy film, which is, I'm sure, well over 1,000 hours of footage, and will end up, well under 1,000 hours. And so, that's just an example. All films have that. There's a high ratio. In this case, we're fairly well designed going into the shooting process, where we've worked on the letters, we've identified them, we know what we're shooting. We don't have endless resources in terms of time and money and crew days and all those things. So we got to be very well prepared, and we really have to know what we're doing. But it doesn't make the editorial process easy. It's not just about slapping the pieces together. What you imagine on paper and what you see when it comes to life are completely different things. And you have no idea what that interview that kind of is forming the spine of the episode is going to be like. And you also don't know in performance how the letter is going to, when somebody's reading the letter, what's going to come across as most powerful and what's not. And the thing about editing, there are many things about editing, but one of the most beautiful things about editing is less is always more. The gesture is the suggestion, the couple of words instead of the lots of words, almost always is the more successful path. And the process that you go through in order to find that is a very challenging one, because you gotta be long before you can be short. And you're always, there are various metaphors that I like to use to describe this, but in some ways it's when you're cooking and you're making a sauce, and the sauce has to reduce. Or I'd love to talk about the block of clay that you're carving away, looking for what the thing really wants to be. And that challenge, which is which happens on every project remains. What does that mean to the story that gets cut down? You know, that's just part of the process, and you want to be as sensitive and supportive to your subjects, but you also need to make the most potent show possible. And you mentioned every episode is, some are 23, some are 30, I think one's 36 or 37. Each of those episodes are exactly the length they wanted to be. This is one of the great, you know, joys of having worked for in so many instances in a commercial television environment where you're working, you've got to build, you know, in very specific units of time. It's beautiful to be able to edit for a streaming service where they're giving you a wider range of options. Here comes my daughter, Maddie. Hey, Mads. You want to say hi? Here she is. She's going to help us a little bit. What's that?
I was watching Princess Sophia, and then I accidentally put my hands on the TV, and then it turned off.
Okay. Can you maybe ask Mom to help you turn it back on? Because I'm doing I'm sorry, hon. I'm going to have to finish doing this, but I'll help you in a little bit as soon as I'm done. Okay. Okay, my love. Okay, I am back.
I hope Justin out there appreciated the Princess Sophia. I know his daughter is also.
Princess Sophia is very powerful art these days. In at 4 it was Peppa Pig. At 5 it's Princess Sophia. Though she just watched Star Wars, man, and she was like, amazing. Yeah, it was very interesting to see the power of that stuff. Same with E.T. E.T. like just got like, there's something. Anyway, other subject. Carry on.
I wanted to ask if you've now started receiving letters from the people that were in the film, I mean in the show, and what their reactions were to actually seeing this thing come together.
Well, folks have certainly reached out, and you know, people are have been very kind about, you know, they've responded very well, and it's very gratifying. You can imagine, and so many of the folks in the show are people I admire enormously, both the subjects and the letter writers, and you know, and what a great moment when Lin Miranda tweeted that it was, you know, the day we filmed with him was a day he'll never forget, and how deeply moved he was. And others have said, you know, people say kind things, but this is an example. Look, what really matters here is what the show is about, and what the show is about is that, and this is what matters for this moment. We are all connected. We, our work, our deeds, our beliefs, they're not just about us at all. They're not about us at all. You know, there is no work without the reception of the work. And I don't mean the critical reception, I mean the connection. And this is a show that looks at that connection. This is a show, there are a lot of, you know, there are a lot of beautiful, wonderful things that accompany you know, when you're a public figure, you put stuff out into the world. But the thing that has the deepest meaning in the context of all of the wonderful things that happen is the connection to other people. I believe that is what motivates people to do work that is put out into the public. It's Lin's ripple. It's Oprah's description of legacy. It's connection. And at a time when, you know, there are those who would have us believe that we are not responsible for each other, that we are not connected to each other, that we are not our brother's keeper, that we are not here to support each other. This is a show that argues vehemently the opposite and demonstrates vehemently the opposite. How the soul of an artwork can change the world. The actions of an individual can change the world. And that's what the show's about. And I don't believe we knew that when we started doing it, but we know it now, and we're really happy to be putting something out in the world that asserts that.
What I also find really beautiful is that these are actually letters in the sense, I mean, whether or not they were handwritten or not, but the engagement with celebrities these days, it's so, tied to social media accounts, and it gets really off the rails pretty quickly in terms of,
Sure.
fans and haters, and, social media can be really toxic for celebrities sometimes. And yet,
yes,
the joy and earnestness and gratitude of these letters
sure.
is really moving. And I'm curious how, did they spend any time sort of talking about their relationship to their fans? Because, you've got someone who's obviously been working for many, many years, like a Stevie Wonder might have one approach versus someone like Lin-Manuel, whose, fame has been, for the past 12 years. He's pretty much had fans almost exclusively in an era where people are communicating with each other, or directly with celebrities through social media.
I want to answer that by saying the unstated aspect of the show that I think is as important and as moving as any other element of it is that response, the response to the fans' response that you see, the look in Spike's eye when he realizes that the gentleman who becomes a university president has seen School Days 202 times, I think it is, he says. But also it's about the connection being complete. And I think that we like to imagine, this is what I found. I imagine, you can't move Oprah. She's heard it all. She's had her back slapped and her hand shaken, and she's hugged, and she's been praised. But those letters touched her, and they touched her because of the individual connection, the one person who she had connected with through her work. And it's we who do work that is seen in public, you don't spend a lot of time thinking about the individual impact, the story, but we who are fans of art and work that is put out into the public we know it happens to all of us. We are deeply moved by the music of Stevie Wonder, by the art of Lin Miranda, by on and on, by the lessons of Big Bird. And those things, they touch us, they change our lives. And because they do that, again, they demonstrate that one person can change the world through their work.
Well, I want to talk about the projects you're working on now, but I have one last question, which is actually the choice of including Big Bird. Where did that come from?
I think the suggestion was from Apple, because they had some relationship going on with the folks over there, and I'm trying to remember the exact story, but the really interesting thing was finding the process, because Big Bird is always the age he is. He's always this kid. He's not reading. He can't read, so he can't read a letter. And there were very specific parameters to work within. Plus, guess what? He's a fictional character. I'm not sure if you're aware. So to interview him was a very specific experience, and it became a meta episode. But then we found it was every bit as powerful, every bit as it was true to the show, and it suggested that in seasons going forward, there are lots of things we can do that we might not have imagined original.
Does that include Dear Princess Sophia?
Ha. Well, you know, as you can imagine, Maddie has much input into all decision making that goes on.
So your upcoming two films must be quite different from each other in terms of form and structure, with one focusing on someone like Belushi that I'm guessing is either heavily archival or a lot of interviews, versus one that's much more verite in the life of someone presently living it. First of all, tell us a little bit about how you got involved in the Billie Eilish story.
We're very much in process with Lily. I don't want to talk too much about it because there's lots and lots of news to come about it. It's incredibly exciting, and it's going to be I think it's going to be something really special. And it was been a remarkable year in her life, as I think the world knows. And we were with her for a year filming, and we met, you know, I guess it was a couple of summers ago, and talked about doing something together, and decided to make this film, and you know, it was thrilling to experience everything with her, to witness it, really, to see her, to see the year that she had, and then and now we're in the process of putting it all together, and it is purely cinema verite. It is, you know, the observational camera. I don't believe we did a single I know we didn't do a single interview for the whole year that we were shooting. We were there observing in the great tradition of cinema verite, going back from me to the war room. We were, to quote Lynn, in the room where it happened, and in every room with that film, and it's really, really thrilling, and it includes the writing of her album, her work with her brother, there's so much going on in there. And so that's one form that I'm, you know, I'm in love with verite, and it's a blast to do. To me, it's so pure in terms of its storytelling, and so engaging, and it's just a pure cinematic experience when you watch a great verite film that's been well put together, well filmed. And again, I'm just a really blessed guy in that I'm working with just brilliant collaborators, from the DP on the film to the editors around. So it's really exciting. With the Belushi film, the Belushi film is entirely archival. Again, but interestingly, again, I don't, with the exception of talking with Judy Belushi, John's widow, who was so incredibly supportive and helpful to us in making the film, we didn't do any interviews for that either. Oh, wow. Because very early on, as I started thinking I would interview folks, and I started talking to people, and I realized, my goodness, everybody's talking through the haze of 35 years of memory, and in 35 years, I found a number of things that were, you know, very distressing to me. One is that their stories had kind of become ossified. That these folks who you would think to interview about John Belushi's life and work, and they had their John Belushi stories. So it was almost like, you know, hitting a number on a jukebox, and you'd get there, but they weren't able, it was very difficult for them to be in the moment because the moment had so long ago passed. And the other thing was they tended to talk about themselves because the moment had so long ago passed. And 35 years later, your reflections are not really about what your experience was. And I wanted this film to be in the moment. And I want all my films to be in the moment, but I knew I wanted that for the Belushi film. And in our research, we came across, one of the incredibly generous things that Judy Belushi did was open up John's archive to us. She had never really let anybody in to see all of his personal collection. And in there, we also, and it was her own personal archive, and in there we found it's always the box of tapes, man. Find the box of tapes. And we made the whole Marlon Brando film on the box of tapes. This box of tapes was a series of interviews that Judy and a journalist named Tanner Colby, who she had engaged, did in the years soon after John's death, and was for an oral history. And these tapes elements of them had been printed, but nobody had ever heard the tapes, and nobody had ever worked with the tapes, and they were everybody in John's life, everybody you would want to be hearing from, everybody in the moment. And in the years soon after he had died. And it's really great stuff. It's powerful stuff. And it required us to work, since we're working principally with audio only, how you marry that to image, to still photographs, the footage that you had, the rare interviews that John gave, and in the case of this film with some animation, became the key to putting that film together. So there you go.
Well, and you did that very effectively in Listen to Me, Marlon.
Yeah, well, Listen to Me, Marlon kind of set the standard for that. I mean, because that is similarly, the story of that film was Mike Medavoy, the executor of Brando's estate, when I first sat down with him to say, do you think it might be time for there to be a movie about Marlon? It had been 10 years since his death. The family had really put everything into a storage facility and sealed it up when he died, because when Marlon Brando died, the public was, he was a subject of much kind of ridicule and mockery, and he was, a big guy buried in whatever. It was the, our culture, as you pointed out, can be really, shitty. And the culture was shitty in the way, given who he was. And I asked Mike if he didn't think there was a film to be made. And he said, well, we haven't, nobody's been in the storage facility since he died, and nobody's ever, listened to the tapes. And I was like, nobody's ever listened to the what? He's like, the tapes in the box. I was like, what do you mean the tapes in the box? He's like, the boxes, they're filled with the tapes. And he says, everybody knows Marlon was an obsessive self-recordist his whole life. He kept audio tapes from when he was a kid in New York to when he'd come out here. There's everything, but nobody's ever listened to them. And sure enough, in the box, we opened up the box and there were the tapes, and it was everything from, micro cassettes, from answering machines to dictaphone stuff, to everything, preparing for roles, he would tape dates, he would tape therapy sessions, acid trips. And that's what Stephen Riley, who directed that film and directed and edited that film, did such extraordinary work with. And as I say, it was Stephen who really set the bar on these audio-driven films. But it's an exciting form. It's a really exciting form. And, there's all sorts of new things happening, given that listen, a lot of the Billy film is shot by Billy on her iPhone and Billy's mom on her iPhone. And we live in a time when, all of our lives, you've met Maddie before. Maddie's entire life is documented. And, anybody, and Billy, who I met when she was 16, so much of her life has been documented just through the routine of day-to-day living, and that footage there are great stories to be told working with that footage. Of course, we shot a ton of footage with her, but
do you have a timeline for that?
You'll be hearing. You'll be hearing.
I can't not ask you, because I watched it recently. There was a Democratic primary in our politics a few years ago before COVID, which actually was just last November. And we watched The War Room again, and I
Yeah.
remember seeing that film. It was one of the first documentaries I ever saw on the big screen, which I remember this movie theater in DC was playing it back in the day. And
Yeah. We kind of, whatever that theater was, we were there for, you know, something like 18 weeks. It was crazy. We were there for months and months, right? And in Georgetown, I think, right?
Yeah. Theater in Georgetown.
Key Theater in Georgetown, exactly. And yeah, I remember that that James and George became matinee idols in DC. Yeah.
And you know, that film, I mean, just to this day, it's just such an extraordinary thing to watch. So I have two quick questions. Well, they might not be quick, but the first one is, how did you get access to make that film? And the second one is, and this is going a little bit far into the future, with the primary that we just had, with this incredibly large field of brilliant minds, have you felt the bug to try and get back into something like that?
Yeah. The answer to the question about access is, I mean, there's a great long story. We don't have time. I wish I could tell it. I spent a year when The War Room came out telling the story to audiences, and it really it involved figuring out how to get access and never taking no for an answer. And I will say that one of the reasons I think that movie exists is because I had never made a movie before. And I had never produced a film before, and I had never arranged for access before. And so I thought when someone said no to me that it was like, you know, it was where I first said to myself, no is just a pathway to yes. And I bought it, you know, and I just would not stop. And I was so certain that that film had to be made that I was relentless, and I would call 100 people a day. And you know, when you get older, no gets harder. You know, people are like, leave me alone, and you know, you start to think maybe I should leave them alone. But when you've never done it before, and you're so kind of, you know, full of the passion and the vision and the certainty, if you believe something must be made, which of course is what you need if you're ever going to make one of these films, you can't take no for an answer. And that was what happened. And eventually, after really everybody had given up and kind of gone home, and there's, you know, long after the deadline we had established to do it. I mean, I had gotten the Pennebakers on board to D.A. Pennebaker and Chris Hedges to direct it, but I hadn't gotten the access. Long after we'd given up, long after we had hugged and said, too bad we can't do it. I was asleep on the office floor of the office I was working out of, and it was days before the Democratic convention, like a day before. I think George was packing up his office, and he probably was just having mercy on me. I'd probably sent him a bunch of telegrams, and we knew enough people in common that he just was like, I'll finally return that guy's call, and I probably won't get him, and then I'll never have to call him back again. And the phone woke me up, and I picked it up, and it was like, RJ Cutler, it's George Stephanopoulos. And I was like, George, where the hell have you been? And I was pitching him on a movie about Bill Clinton and trying to persuade him, and he said no 6 or 7 times. And he said to me, it's my job not to let you film with the president. He said, it sounds like an amazing idea. D.A. Pennebaker, Chris Hedges, how wonderful this is, but unfortunately, I just have to say no, I'm sorry. I know you've been reaching out, I can't do it. And he said one too many times, he told me what a great idea it was. And I said to him, well, if you think it's such a great idea, what if we film with you? And what if we and I was thinking to myself, we'll film with him, and then the president will come. The governor will come in the room, we'll leave the room. I didn't know, I did not know. And so I said, what if we film with you? And George said, what do you have in mind? And that was how we then met, and we got, you know, and that's that story. Do I have an itch to get back in? Yeah, I mean, I love politics. I love, you know, we did Dick Cheney not too long ago. There are, interesting stories to tell. It's got to be the right circumstances. But, it's tricky now because there are cameras everywhere.
Yeah.
There are cameras everywhere. Everybody's got their own crews. They do their own thing. So, but there's a thing we're cooking. We're stirring up in the pot that maybe will come to happen.
I would imagine also that there's more reluctance from politicians who, especially right now, I've seen so much stuff polarized and taken out of context.
Yes, and also they all have their own crews. You should control your own media, but to make a film that's as authentic as The War Room was. And fans of The War Room should please take a look at A Perfect Candidate, which was the movie we made 2 years later about Charles Robb's Senate campaign in Virginia in 1994 against Oliver North, the Iran-Contra villain, or hero, if you are inclined to think of villains as heroes. I mean, that's a film, you watch it and you think you're watching politics today. We did a 25th anniversary screening of it during the last campaign, and it was like you were watching Donald Trump's campaign video. It's crazy. Or North's campaign was the same. It was Trump's campaign. The politics hasn't changed a lot in this country in 30 years. The fault lines, listen, this is news. The fault lines are the same.
That was sort of when the polarization started with like Newt Gingrich coming in and
that's right,
really dividing.
That's absolutely right.
Well, enough about divisive politics. I want to bring in some of the students. So as I've done in the past, for those of you out there watching, I'd like to invite you to come in and actually ask your question live. So if you're camera ready, when I call on you and I bring you over to the panelist side, just please make sure to turn on your mic, of course. But then if you'd like to, also turn on your video so that we can actually see you. So let's see what we've got. Okay, so let's go out to Shelly Moore. And Shelly, I'm going to move you over.
Now what happens?
Well, so so Shelly, you're on with us.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi, Shelly Moore.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Yes, I'm not on camera, but I could change that. Anyway, I was wondering if you thought about doing the letters from other folks in the future, such as like from grateful patients to doctors, and maybe partnering with Keck School of Medicine.
It's such a great question, and one of the elements of a kind of parallel project that we've talked to Apple about doing is an online letters that individuals would be able to send to folks who had changed their lives. The expression of that using Twitter, using social media. And we have talked to them a lot about it. There was a catchy phrase for it that's slipping my mind now, but it was I thought a brilliant idea and really, really exciting, and something Apple would promote. And they would start by encouraging fans. Who would you write your letter to? Was the question that they would ask fans of the show, and then encourage them to do so. And so there you go.
Oh, that would be great. I'd love to see that and hear more about it.
We will pass the word on. I'm glad to hear it.
With so many projects going on simultaneously, how do you actually figure out your work schedule?
Well, I have a pretty structured, a structured week. We do, it's actually, Don't ask that, because then I'll think it's like asking me to look down when you're climbing up. You know, we just work. We the days are full and the weeks are full, and I have an amazing team, and not for announcement, but we're putting together a new company, and we're kind of growing a little bit, and that's exciting for another day. And but I have a producing partner named Trevor Smith, who's a brilliant producer, and so we carry producing load together, and we've always observed about ourselves that we have the ability to produce, you know, kind of endlessly, as we can fill however many minutes there are in the day. And in terms of the directing projects, you do a lot of scheduling. You work really carefully to schedule things. I believe in over communication. I want to have more meetings instead of less meetings, so that we make sure that everybody's on the same page, that you're not letting weeks go by where you're not in touch with your collaborators on projects. So almost every project we have has a weekly meeting, and whether it's a 10-minute meeting or an hour-long meeting, depending on where the project is and in the life of the project, you do that. And cuts are scheduled to come in. You know, we have 2 editors on the Billy project, and you need a awesome support team, and we have that. So you figure it out. It's a producing challenge. You know, I'm producing my own schedule, but it's it makes every week really fun and exciting and adventurous, and it couldn't be I like a lot of work, so it's fun.
We got a question from a different Alex A. That Alex wants me to read. How did you work with each of the directors of Dear to give each episode its own flavor depending on who the subject was?
You know, I'm gonna say that's really what Lyle and his team did, working with each. There's a consistent style to the episodes. There's a visual style that we defined and refined. And when it wasn't working, we went back and did it again, and we figured key things out. And then Lyle and the directors and their team would work specifically on the challenges of each episode, so that they would all have a very specific visual integrity look and feel, and each letter would have a specific visual integrity look and feel.
Is the series, once something like this is up and running, do you think I didn't get a chance to watch every one of them. Did you direct any of them? Is that something that you might do in the next season?
I don't think so. My contribution is the role I play on the Dear series as an executive producer, and it's fully engaging and time consuming. And if I'm directing an individual episode, somebody's got to have the overview of the entire project, the entire team, the entire project. And then with each successive job that gets more and more specific, your overview gets more limited. So I'm not directing. I can't direct and also executive produce. I can't have the narrow view, the specificity required. And we have beautiful, brilliant directors who did such great work. So the system works, and then I'm able to come in and have somewhere between the 10,000 and the 100-foot view. But it's also, when you're editing the episodes, you get too close to them. You need someone who has that perspective, who can really help you out and suggest edits to the cuts and all those things, and give notes on and also engage with our partners at the network, which is as much of as full-time and a part of the process as anything else.
I want to invite over one of our incoming freshmen, or at least
incoming freshmen. What will you do?
At least
Where will you go to school?
Student admitted for the fall. I'm assuming they're freshmen. So I'm going to invite over Jacob Salerno. And yeah, best not to speculate too much about the fall as things keep changing, but we have
Well, congratulations, Jacob. Jacob, where are you from?
Oh, can you see me?
There you go, man. Where are you from?
I'm from Raleigh, North Carolina, and that's where I'm from.
Awesome. Well, congratulations. You're coming to USC.
I am. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's exciting.
My question for you was, in terms of documentary filmmaking and in the creative process of anything, the whole point of making something is to have a takeaway for it. And in the process of documentary filmmaking, I've found that it is, especially cinema verite, it is oftentimes not until late in the process that you find that takeaway. And I was curious as to how you find, if there's a constant between all of your films that you've made, if there is a way that you go about finding that.
Yeah, I that's a really, really thoughtful and smart question. So thank you. And here's what it makes me think to say. If you talk about how you know, there's this thing about the film tells you what it wants to be. If you think of the film as a living, breathing entity that has its own thoughts and its own meaning and its own opinions about the world, it starts to become clearer what your relationship to that, just like a person you are having coffee with, it starts to become clearer what that thing is. And the key is staying open to it. Not for me, and everybody's going to answer this question differently, but for me, it's not about what I want it to be. It's about what it wants to be, what it is saying, and so that's one answer to your question. And the other answer to your question is I find that every film I've made is a combination of what I've witnessed and what I've experienced while witnessing it. And as a result, if you had been the director of the September issue, and if you had spent the same exact amount of time with Anna Wintour and the folks at Vogue in 2007 making that film, the film that you made and the film that I made would have been completely different. And the difference between those two films is the difference between you and the difference and me. And that's the way I would answer your question, is that, you know, you trust yourself, you trust your relationship to this film, which is a living, breathing thing. And what do you know? It comes out having that meaning. You're really talking about what the meaning of the film is and what the difference between a film directed by you and a film directed by someone else would be. So the fact that you're asking that question is enough, I would say. Trust in the process and be open to discovery. And late in the process is good. The longer you go, the longer you're open to learning about what it is and what it wants to be, I think ultimately the better off you'll be. I hope that works. Thank you, Jacob.
Okay, another written question. What were two of the most important notes you received from Apple TV that impacted the outcome of the show the most?
We at first they were discouraging a certain level of realism in the reenactments, and then there was some question as to whether that was wise or not, or that was more successful or not. And then they encouraged, you know, we had to find a sweet spot. We had to find a sweet spot where it didn't feel like reenactments, but it also was telling a story. And it's a very, you know, it's threading a needle to have the letter writer walking through the experience and you believing that that person was in the experience but not in the experience. And the notes that they gave us on that were incredibly wise, incredibly helpful. And we were able to point to some things that worked and some things that just missed. And again, they would have a person, because they're one step removed from it from me. By the time we would hand in episodes, I had by then seen it many, many times and was certain it was working. And I would say, not quite, and here's why. And then we had a lot of talk about eye contact, because the more eye contact you have with that letter writer, the more powerful it is. And believe it or not, that was something we discovered. That was something we learned, we realized, we experimented with, we found how it worked. But figuring out that very kind of narrow line between reenactment that feels hokey and it doesn't quite work because it's you're asking the person to act, and someone who is reading a letter, walking through an environment that is a recreation of a moment they're describing. What is that line, and where is the right spot on that line that it has an emotional impact and a truth to it? And finding that our friends at Apple were incredibly helpful with, and it made this a real collaboration.
Well, RJ, I know that there's a couple people who are also looking forward to some of your time tonight.
Yes, Maddie and I have our movie madness coming, so there's still time.
I'm excited for you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and I really can't wait to see what the second season of this looks like.
Well, I hope, yes, well, I appreciate your saying that, and thanks for having me, and always a pleasure.
And we'll definitely be in touch when you're ready for Billie Eilish.
I will look forward to talking Billie Eilish with her core fan group over there. Okay, peace.
Good
Thanks,
night.
you guys.